Okay, so let's start. Again, my name is Thokozile Madonka. I'm with the Cape Town Together co-learning team, and I'm also with the Plumstead Deep River CAN, and I also work with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. And I will be facilitating today's conversation. As always, we try our best to make sure there aren't any technical difficulties, but this is Zoom and there's always a ghost in the machine. And so we apologize if there are any issues with technology, to put it that way. So this morning's topic is really very, very close to my heart, and I'm gonna kick off with a little. I'm gonna take liberties and say it's close to my heart because both my parents benefited in different ways in relation to accessing cash transfers that supported their abilities to access education and to be able to live differently in the world than if that had not been the case. And so this is something that is both personal and that has happened in my family, but also has been debated for a very long time at the beginning of the transition to post-apartheid South Africa, but throughout, and something that I've worked in many ways to try and have a conversation about. But I am no means an expert, and so we are really lucky to have two speakers today, Prince Tamane from the Sakane CAN, and he is a political activist, and he's the director of the Kula Kanye NPC and a shareholder at Kula Kanye Holdings, and has been thinking deeply and meaningfully on the issue around universal basic income guarantee. And then we have Natasha Valley. Dr. Natasha Valley is from the Woodstock CAN and is a lecturer in the Department of Sociology at the University of Cape Town. She's a feminist and a mother, and also has done some very deep thinking around UBIG. We're also lucky to have on the call today Lynette Mart from Black Sash. And Black Sash has done phenomenal work around grants and the grant system in South Africa. And so we might, if we can, I will draw on Lynette after our two speakers just to share some thoughts. And this also forms part of a broader campaign reflecting on the impact of COVID-19. And so I would encourage you, as you hear the two speakers this morning, to just reflect on your own experiences working within your CANs, but within your families around the impact that COVID-19 had on people's abilities to access much needed cash in order to be able to do the things that give them dignity, a sense of being and being able to participate in the economy, as we like to talk about. So please, again, throw your questions, your thoughts into the group chat. And we have a few people who are doing PhDs on UBIG, which is great. And I know there's a few of us that are working on this issue. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Prince, and he is going to talk towards a UBIG. Prince, over to you.
Thank you very much, Togo. Warm greetings to the Gauteng Together team, the leaders of the community action networks, the leaders of the non-profit organizations, the people involved in both our private sectors and who are volunteers in their community doing charity work. It is a pleasure today to be sharing this platform with you. I am Prince, as said earlier on, a political activist. I'm the director of Kula Kanye NPC, a shareholder at Kula Kanye Holdings. As we all know that the country is in the alert level 1, we come from a great test as a country. Through all collectiveness, we were able to overcome the storm and pass the devastating test. We have seen many organizations, companies, and individuals doing all it takes to succor where possible, each according to specific ability. Together with colleagues, friends, and supporters, we here in Tsakane, we have been able to donate over 3,000 food parcels. We have donated over 2,000 food vouchers, and we have provided over 5,000 meals. We have also been able to donate clothes to over 200 kids from disadvantaged families. A lot has been done, and time is not on my side to count. But going back to today's topic, the government introduced the social relief grant, which we all know, the 350 grants. This grant was aimed at ensuring that all citizens have access to food, health, security, of which these are essential to everyone. Now, the citizens who have had to be beneficiaries of the 350 grants have faced numerous challenges. Many of these were amongst those who had to wait for 3 months until the grant was paid to their account. This simply means they had to find means to survive while the grant was not paid to them in time. The report shows that 2.5 million rand was paid for technical task team to review the South African Social Security Agency to restructure the business model and make recommendations in reforming how SASSA made its cash payment. Clearly, these technical advisors did not fix anything of the agency's challenge, as the report confirmed that SASSA is currently drowning under the backlog of 300,000 emails and 4,000 attempt phone calls a day from desperate people around the country needing assistance with special COVID relief grant of 350. This is a clear sign that there is no universal access to the grant, so the current grant system is actually not helping the South African who are disadvantaged. 18 million people in South Africa rely on these social grants, with 20% of households depending on grants as their main source of income. The stats above were updated on the 7th of May 2020. Now one is asking, what more as people lost their jobs during the last few months as a result of COVID-19? It is also important to note that the number of dependents exceeds the number of social grants beneficiaries by a considerable margin. In most cases, the grant, which includes pension, disability payments, and child support grants, support the entire household. These households will be destitute if they do not receive grants payments in a timely fashion. They will not be able to buy food as these households receiving grants typically don't have any savings. They survive by spending whatever they receive. Now, the question we have today and which we need to address is how the government can help. The answer is no other than the government to ensure that everyone has access to what the government has to offer, and the government should ensure that the rescue plan will enable people to have access to food and basic needs, which it is clear that the 350 grant was not enough. We have households of 4 people and above, so this grant is not helping. So the only way is to implement the universal basic income guarantee, which I hope the next speaker will focus on. The universal basic income guarantee will be the grant which will be available for all citizens, and it will be part of a response from the government to helping the citizens and making sure that this grant is accessible and it will be more sustainable than the current grant, as I mentioned earlier on that 2.5 million was paid to technical team to fix the current issues at SASSA. Now, we need as a country a sustainable way to pay grants into our people. So the basic income grant will be a response, and it is clear that the basic income grant was part of a plan from past few years, but nothing has been said up to this far. Now it is time for citizens to join hands and fight for this grant to be implemented, as it is the only solution post the COVID-19 which has struck in South Africa. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Prince. I think you've outlined exactly the challenges that have been faced. And I might ask you towards the end just a little bit about what you're seeing on the ground in Gauteng. And I'm also curious if there's anybody in the call who, on the Zoom, you see we do these multiple platforms, who's here this morning that has received the grant and feels comfortable to talk about it, or has tried to access it, or has had family members try to access the COVID-19 grant, but also just more broadly, your experience of the grant system as Prince has spoken about. Before Natasha, I hand over to Natasha, what I would like everybody to do is to lift their hands up and give me some emojis or some comments. I want some deep breaths in and out. Yeah, that's it, some claps there. And because we're all on silent and no videos, you can even make some nice soury faces. Right? If you are major computer workers, get those wrists moving, get the blood pumping. I don't know where you are, but I woke up cold this morning. And that was a fantastic presentation from Prince. And then what I would like you to do is just to take a minute, close your eyes and imagine that you have to get all your documents together to prove that you are now, what they use the term indigent or poor, or in a situation where you are requiring support. So as where you are, and some of you have experienced this, and some of you may have not experienced this. We all come to this topic from different positions and different situations. And I want you to think about the steps that it takes for you to be able, what do you need to know? What would you need to do? Who would you need to speak to be able to begin to think about how can I get what is necessary for me to be able to feed, clothe, water. Do you have access to water in your house regardless of having to pay for it? Is that something available to you? Do you have electricity available to you that you wouldn't have to pay for? Where is the closest SASSA office for you? Where would you go to access those, and who would you need to speak to? What would it take? Photocopying documents. Do you have those documents? Just take a moment. Then I want you to balance it with, just by virtue of having some kind of an ID number, you're able to just go along and say, every month something arrives in my bank account or in a post office account or whatever it might be. Or you can go to the local supermarket and access your cash. Just balance the difference between those two. So imagine those two experiences. One where you have to prove that you are now poor, and one where doesn't even come up, you automatically receive an amount of cash that you're able to access, no matter your circumstances, whether you're working or not working. Okay, I hope that was a useful little thought exercise, and we will now hand over to Dr. Natasha Valley. Natasha, over to you.
Thanks so much, Togo. Thanks for taking the time to facilitate this and for the work you do in the co-learning space, and to all of the togethers and the cans, and of course to Prince as well for starting us off. So I'm going to focus on an income guarantee, and it would be useful and valuable, like Togo says, for us to have a kind of more interactive conversation, as interactive as one can get over these platforms. So I hope to just give some of the outlines of the points that I think are fundamental around discussing an income guarantee. Togo, can I get a yo or a yes for you being able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Cool, okay. So a UBIG or a BIG stands for a basic income grant or a basic income guarantee. The U is for universal. Some of the more specific definitions, and the one that I tend to use, is that a basic income involves a regular, reliable distribution of money from government to people to help ensure total income sufficient to meet common basic needs. The distribution is made without regard for whether recipients have paid labor or not. And in addition, when it's universal, the distribution is made without regard for whether or not someone is considered deserving. So the reason why we would like to stress that it be called a guarantee and not a grant is that, firstly, we want to stress the unconditionality of it, that you don't have to do anything to prove that you deserve the grant. Some conditions that are put in place in other places in the world for grants include having to have your child vaccinated, having to show mandatory school attendance, having to show that you're looking for work. This was one of the most violent TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program that was instituted under Clinton in the US, was extremely violent, in particular to Black women caregivers who were forced to prove that they were looking for work. So a guarantee instead of a grant means that you don't have to prove any of these things. It's unconditional. There are no conditions. And therefore it is universal as well, because you don't have to prove that you don't have enough money. You don't have to show that you're deserving. It reduces administration because of there not being all of this bureaucracy. A guarantee and not a grant is almost always associated with a larger amount of money for everybody. And a guarantee instead of a grant takes away any relationship to searching for or doing paid labor. So this is why we kind of stress it being called a guarantee and not a grant. It feels like a small thing, but it is grounded in the politics of what is being demanded. So the current social grant system completely excludes all South Africans between the ages of 18 and 59. So below 18, you would receive a child support grant, and over 59, you would receive an old age grant. And ostensibly, the kind of theory behind this is that those people aged between 18 and 59 should be able to find paid employment. But we know that the reality is that there is not enough wage labor for anyone, but particularly those who are not considered the typical worker. So for particularly people who are living with disabilities, for particularly women, for people who are find it more difficult to find employment. So if you are trans and you don't have an ID document that matches your gender identity, and many, many other kind of factors. So, and even if you are an able-bodied male of this working age, we know that particularly in South Africa, but this is also a trend around the world, it is heightened here, there is no wage labor. You can look all you want, but where there is wage labor, people are bringing home, even if you are in a full-time permanent job, you're bringing home 4,000 Rand a month. If you are not, you often are picking up small pieces of precarious, informal, insecure work. And then you're earning, of course, even less than that amount. So there being no income for 18 to 59-year-olds doesn't mean that all of a sudden there are going to be jobs. There are no jobs. So, and we need to realize that, and we know this, that the poverty and inequality in our society doesn't just come from when we're born. This is grounded in a history of dispossession, of colonialism, of apartheid. You don't get rich in a generation, and you don't get poor and dispossessed in a generation. So, and of course, we know that this inequality is particularly stark for Black women. The multiple levels of violence, including economic violence. So, a guaranteed income security would begin to recognize these injustices. And I think recognition is an important part of this. Our current system does not recognize inequality. Some people call the social grant system a redistributive mechanism. That's not the debate for today. But if it is, then it is the only one in post-apartheid South Africa. And that's a fundamental failure, that there's been a lack of redistributive efforts. And of course, we know that it's not that these women are not working. Oftentimes, it's just that their work is not paid. So often it's work that's being done in the homes. Some people call it housework, but it's the things that us as women do daily. Some people call it reproductive labor, and economists have valued this at up to 50% of the GDP. So it is these women who are holding up the economy with no remuneration, no economic remuneration. Which is not to say that a basic income guarantee should be thought of as paying people for care work, right? But it does provide a secure income to anyone who needs to care for others and anyone who needs care. And in many ways, that's, of course, all of us. But there are those of us who need particular kinds of care and who are giving particular kinds of care. That's mothers, that's people who are caring for elderly relatives, etc. It gives people the flexibility to combine caring for others with part-time paid employment. And I think the reality is that it gives everybody a certain amount of flexibility. I'll get into this in a little while, but one of the things that an income guarantee would be able to do is that it provides choice, a certain amount that's limited, of course, but it eliminates that care trap that penalizes carers. So oftentimes you have caregivers being forced to choose between taking care of whomever they are required to take care of, and taking paid employment. So it allows for that kind of flexibility of time, flexibility of energy. It diminishes bureaucracy. So caregivers don't have to apply for allowances and credits, but also some of the things that Prince was talking about. And from some of our work on the privatization of the grant system from 2012, bureaucracy is not only onerous, but the sharing of personal information through many kind of private entities which are likely to administer the bureaucracies has led to a huge number of people losing their grants. Lynette from the Black Sash will be able to tell you a lot more about this, but debits off of accounts that were where permission was not granted by the grant recipient, etc., etc., etc. So diminishes bureaucracy. It allows, so the COVID pandemic has just highlighted the extreme levels of gender-based violence in our country. And a lot of the time, women cannot leave because they're in a home where they have some level of economic support or just have a roof over their heads. An income guarantee would provide particularly precarious people, women primarily, a certain amount of space and leverage to leave. And that is fundamental for women's safety and choice. But I also think that we have to move beyond thinking of an income guarantee as just an individual payment. Some of the pilot studies that have been done around the world show that people do come together with this income guarantee and do cooperative projects. So sometimes it might be food gardening, sometimes it's sharing care work amongst one another, sometimes it's just sharing money amongst one another, on a Stokvel kind of basis. So don't get it wrong to think that there are some neoliberal economists who love the idea of an income guarantee because of an income cash transfer, because it places responsibility at the site of an individual. But there's evidence that shows that people don't want to be greedy. People don't want to live by themselves. We all saw how absolutely difficult it was for us during lockdown, over and above the dire economic consequences, etc. We just missed each other. I missed people. I haven't seen Togo's face for almost a year. You miss hugging people. We need each other. And the reality is that people, when given the opportunity, would rather share than not. So the idea is also that an income guarantee would allow for this to happen better. Even though as we push towards an income guarantee, this is something we need to stress. I don't want to be mistaken for someone that thinks that an income guarantee is a silver bullet or a panacea. There are ways that an income guarantee can be usurped as a kind of plaster on capitalism, and we need to avoid that. But I think that's something we can talk about further. The other point I wanted to raise here was that an income guarantee recognizes those who are doing work that the state doesn't necessarily recognize as work. So I've spoken about caregivers in the home, but also I think employment such as sex work. So COVID-19 has had a really stark impact on sex workers. And this is for obvious reasons. Sex workers aren't able to work. when there's nobody around in the street, but also when being in physical contact with one another is extremely dangerous for your health and those around you. And because sex workers are not considered workers yet, hopefully it's sooner than later that they will be, but they weren't able to apply for UIF or TERS. So that's important. An income guarantee would, if not directly, would indirectly acknowledge those people who are doing work that is not officially considered work. With regards to health, in pilot studies around the world, an income guarantee has been shown to dramatically increase maternal health. And of course, children born to mothers who are in income guarantee pilots tend to be healthier, tend to grow better. And part of this is also connected to food security, but also importantly, mental health. Those who face most of the burden of mental illness are those who are precarious. We know this. And an income guarantee has been shown to allow people to get assistance when it's required, but also just not having that constant burden of, needing to hustle all the time does have an impact on mental health. And also in general, the freedom to say no is bolstered. And the freedom to say no is as important in many ways to the freedom to say yes. No to this shitty job where I'm compromised in many ways. No to staying in this house. No to having to choose between two, very important parts of your life, etc. I just want to point to some of the starkness of inequality in our society as a starter to talk about how an income guarantee could be financed. So if we were to think about a solidarity tax, so that would be taxing 20% of the top 4 earners in this country, at top 4% of earners, although I'm sure the top 4 earners would get you a lot of money also. But the top 4% of earners, that would already raise 110 billion rand. So, I mean, that's a lot of money, and it's really, really scary that the top 4% earn this much money. And the top 4% isn't millions and millions and millions of us. It's fewer than 2 million people who are this top 4% of earners. Even if we had to take the top 2% of earners and tax 20%, we'd be able to raise 80 billion rand. So that's about 750,000 people. So that just goes to show how rich the richest are, but it also goes to show how progressive income tax can play a big part in financing an income guarantee. And I wanted to end off with what I think is probably the more important discussion than where we're going to get the money, the details of it, how we're going to do the paperwork, etc. Because I think the details, of course, are fundamental, and there are people and organizations doing really important work around this. But once we get lost in the details, we can also forget what an income guarantee can do and what it can't do. And one of the things that an income guarantee can do is similar to what the Wages for Housework campaign in the 1970s was trying to do, which was to really draw attention to work. What counts as work? What doesn't count as work? Whose work is valued? Whose work is invisible? And it also opens up this kind of discussion that we're having now, where questions of deservedness, people, again, especially in South Africa, partly because of our history and partly because we've been indoctrinated to think like this, connect working with dignity, connect formal employment with being a deserving citizen. And we really need to disconnect those connections, because having a job or not having a job should not be what makes you dignified, and what gives you dignity. And that's going to take a lot of undoing, and it's going to take a lot of organizing. It's not just going to take the implementation of an income guarantee. It's going to take mobilization. It's going to take grassroots level action. And it's going to take us raising this constantly, constantly raising that paid work does not lead to formal employment does not lead to economic stability. So why do we keep connecting dignity to work, especially when there's so little work? Does that mean that so few of us are dignified? These are important questions for us to ask. And I think it'll, in the long term, connect an income guarantee to a political move, not only to a practical move, even though that's fundamental. And then just to end off, Togo, I want to raise the point that an income guarantee allows us to redistribute one of the most important things that is taken for granted by the rich and those who are more economically secure, which is time. And, even sitting in this meeting for an hour and being able to sit and organize and talk like this is a fundamental part of us being able to work towards a better world. So an income guarantee provides us a small amount of cushion of time to do the things that I spoke about above, to make choices between this and that, between that and that, but also to just be together in community of discussion, of organizing, of making the world a better place. So an income guarantee is not going to solve the fundamental structural inequalities in the system, but it'll allow us space, time, and hopefully some energy to work towards making a better world for everybody. Thanks, Togo.
Okay, can everybody put their mics off and give a big shout out to both Natasha and Prince? Woo!
Yeah.
Yes! Get those mics off. Let's give them a woo!
Yay.
Let's hear the voices.
Everybody.
Dance like it's 2019 and say thank you.
Yay.
Back in the day when we used to hang out together. Woo!
Thanks, guys.
Okay, thank you so much, Natasha, and thank you so much, Prince. That was fantastic. I think I'm not sure if she was able to rejoin, but Lynette had to leave, and I'm not sure if she made it back in again. But we can always have a follow-up discussion on this. Because there's a few themes that interlink. So what I would like to do is I've created a little Mentimeter. I'm learning skills here, guys, so help me out. So when you have time, you can go to www.menti.com and use the code 5233509. I've put it in the chat. And we'll put it up on the Facebook page as well, because we find that we found that we get really lovely feedback, over time as things percolate, as the thoughts kind of come into play, and then we're able to kind of consolidate that with the magic of design and illustration. So we would love to have that. Right, so I think let's open it up. We don't have a lot of time because I desperately want to talk as well, but it's not my time to talk. So if you would like, I've got the participants list open in front of me, so I can see you if you put your hands up. And I have Mohadi, you've got your hand up, is that right? Would you like to unmute? I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly. Mahadi, I see your hand is up. No? Okay. Next person who would like to speak? Any thoughts, questions, reactions?
Hi, everyone. Does anyone have a question for the speakers?
Yeah.
Any questions around any of the things that were discussed, whether it's financing or the idea of deservedness or anything that you want to know?
Yeah. Thanks. Ah, there we go. Leanne, fire away.
Thanks, Toko, and morning, everybody. Thanks so much for great presentations. The question I have, I'm not sure if any folks on this call have been involved, but there was some discussion about the special COVID grant being somehow the beginnings of a basic income guarantee. And I just wondered if anyone, particularly Tanya and Natasha, if you guys know of if those conversations were ever had in any kind of formal capacity, and if there's any movement on that front.
Great. Thanks, Leanne. Natasha, I don't know if you want to chat to answer.
Sure, Togo, or I can, or we can collect hands. Okay, no, you're the facilitator. Let me say that initially that was the call as the special COVID grant was announced, but many have said that connecting an income guarantee to a grant system does reasserts all of those concerns with a grant instead of a guarantee. And we want to, of course, make sure that this is a universal, non-means tested grant guarantee. The COVID grant, remember, had many conditions. And as Prince was saying, and I think maybe he'd be better positioned here, many people have been rejected from receiving the special COVID grant because they have some money in their bank accounts, because they receive a small amount of income from a family member, for example, because they could apply for TERS, even though their employer hasn't completed the necessary bureaucratic documentation. So while so in theory, the call to say that we need to use the energy of this moment where people are receiving this extended grant to keep going with an income guarantee was, I think, embraced by many of us. Many of us also saw the concern and the challenges linking it directly to the COVID grant. And in terms of it being taken up in more formal spaces, it depends on to whom you're speaking, where the suggestion is to call it an extension of the COVID grant or to think of it as something completely new. One of the things that the COVID temporary grant did was that it did, for the first time, get paid to that group of the missing age group between 18 to 59. So many have highlighted that it does that. But yeah, so the answer is kind of complex.
Thanks, Natasha. And the Black Sash has been working as well on documenting and will be doing more work around the impact, if possible, of this grant, because they have been pushing, and there isn't I mean, there's some broader kind of agreement around providing social assistance or social security. It's in our constitution. So it's not something that people are just dreaming up because they kind of like the idea. It is a right as per section 27. I was just having a look at it. And then when you read the other sort of the Bill of Rights, and again, I would be showing you my constitution. I hope you all have one lying around in a handy place. You will find that to give effect to many of the other rights, you need money. And so there is some argument to be made around, because we are a money-based cash economy. We're not a bartering economy. Our choice has been to have this kind of economic system that we have at the moment that requires you to have money to be able to effectively engage. And we have been having other conversations about alternative types of economies. And that's also important for us to have these kinds of conversations around the hybrid nature of the ways in which we live and not to take anything for granted, which is important. So there was a question where was it? Someone was saying, what are the arguments, what are the most powerful arguments, strongest arguments against UBIG? In other words, what would critics say and how would you respond? So that's a lovely question. And then Hlengiwe, your hand is up, so please fire away. If you're talking, you're on mute. Are you there? I'm seeing hands. Question? No?
Oh, hi.
There you are. Great.
I'd like to ask Prince if, as a political activist, is there maybe any political organization that is fighting for this UBIG thingamajiggy?
Okay, great. Thanks, Hlengiwe. Just checking the group chat as people think. Anything else? Dawn's listening from the UK. Well, you can definitely share some of the experiences and work that's being done in the UK. Interestingly enough, there's a German-wide case taking place, a universal, there's a test case happening in Germany where people have pooled funds to support in terms of an income to see the impact. So that's an interesting case. I don't see any other questions. It feels overwhelming to me to prove my poverty and have the appropriate documentation. Yeah. So that's why we talk about universal as opposed to a grant, means testing. Anything else on here that I'm looking for? Right. So let's go to some of those arguments against a UBIG and what critics say. So Natasha and Prince, fire away, and then Prince, if there's any organizations that you're working with in relation to UBIG. So maybe Prince, you can go ahead, and then Natasha.
Yes. Good morning again, everyone. Just to answer Hlengiwe in a short way because of time. We have organizations actually who are ready, already putting this thing into consideration, the UBIG into consideration. There are petitions which are there to be signed. You can see through the chat, there is a Mandla link. You can go there, sign the petition. But currently we're working with the Pay the Grants. There is an organization, Pay the Grants. It is a group of people who are also supporting this UBIG. And as a political activist, yes, there's an organization which is fighting for the implementation of this UBIG. COSAS is having talks internally, but their response will be out soon on what you take on the UBIG. So this UBIG will be actually supported. It is a matter of understanding. We just need to raise awareness, which I know today's meeting is all about raising awareness. Raise awareness to the people on what UBIG is. And once the people understand, they will see this is the only solution for the people, as hunger and poverty is striking in each and every corner of South Africa. So the UBIG is the only solution. So the political organizations are yet to consider.
Great, thanks, Prince. Natasha?
Thanks, Toro. So Hlengi, I think related to your question, in the chat box I've typed a little bit of information from the C19 Coalition subgroup on grants. You can, yeah, it's on Twitter at Pay the Grants with the hashtag Pay the Grants, also on Facebook. And there's work being done there by a array of people from civil society, NGOs, community organizing, academics, etc., working around grants in general, but also working around the basic income grant. But I'm going to be honest here. For the most part, direct work on the big is top down, is generally done by, has been being done by NGOs. When the trade unions had a strong position on it in the early 2000s, but since then it's kind of unclear. It's back and forth depending on whether they're calling for rather a job creation rather than an income guarantee. So that's not clear. And the reality is that there isn't enough kind of mobilization in ways that I think are broad in the ways that we'd want it to be. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And I don't think we should imagine that what's currently being done is extremely broad-based. It's unfortunate, and it's something that can change. And like I finished off what I was saying, like I finished off my talk saying, it might be that an income guarantee is what allows people to push for the politics of an income guarantee. So that's part of it. But yes, the Pay the Grants campaign is working towards this and trying to connect some of the practical aspects with thinking of the politics and the political moment, instead of only kind of lobbying for policy change and lobbying the kind of the department, etc., but lobbying for mobilization. In terms of the arguments, I don't know if they're necessarily the strongest arguments, but the most widely cited arguments against basic income guarantee, there tend to be about 3 of them, but the 2 main ones are that people will get lazy and won't look for work. And the second, sorry, let me give you the top 3. The second is that there's not enough money and we can't afford it. And the third is that rich people will get even more money, and surely that's what we're fighting against. So let me just address them in turn. The first one, that it'll make people lazy. Of course, we need to do away with this whole notion of what constitutes laziness and what doesn't constitute laziness. It's very much related to productivity, a la kind of the status quo. But leaving that kind of in our minds for a second, having an income actually makes people look for work more actively. Think about it, you know, if you had a child, you're able to get some kind of childcare to go and look for work. You're able to get taxi fare to go and look for work. You're able to print out your CV and hand it out. You're able to kind of make phone calls. And it's been shown that people look for work more when they have some kind of income. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that even if people look for work, the problem is that there's not enough work. So it doesn't, you know, you can look all you want in a world that doesn't have work. The other point is that we need to disconnect deservedness. Let me say this. We keep demonizing the idea of being dependent. And actually, what we want is a world where we're dependent on one another. What's wrong with being dependent, right? We need to have a world where those of us who are able to do more, make more, have more, share. So dependency needs to be undemonized, whatever that word is. Okay, the second point, that we can't afford it. I raised some things about progressive taxation, solidarity taxes. There are also arguments about how the very richest make the most detrimental impacts on the environment. So there's also possibilities for a kind of environmental taxation on large polluters, large companies, which in itself is a kind of solidarity tax. But I think the bigger question is how can we not afford this, right? We need to think of affording something as outside of just being monetary, because we can make money for other things, right? When the country needed to shut down at short notice, it was able to. And I think that there's more lack of political will. We can make money for arms and huge arms deals and all sorts of things. So we need to also think about affording as a moral obligation. Like, you find the money, but we also know that it's there. So I think that's the important thing. And then the last thing about that, what will happen is that the rich will just get more money. The reality is that the rich will pay back more than an income guarantee in progressive taxation. So that kind of falls away. And actually the administrative burden on being able to cut out the rich is more onerous and more expensive than just paying the grant universally and using progressive taxation to recoup that income. Thanks.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, the bell has gone. We've gone over time. If everybody could unmute, give yourselves a round of applause for getting up so beautifully on a Wednesday morning to learn about UBIG. Thank you so much to Prince and Natasha. Woo! Thank you. Thank you.
Guys.
Thanks, Togo.
Thank you, guys.
Then if you have a 2 rand, a 1 rand, a 5 rand, 100 rand, keep it in your wallet for a week and just walk around with it and just imagine what it would enable you to do if suddenly you couldn't access your bank accounts. So that's the test.
Good idea.
To think about universal questions of universality. So we look forward to your ideas. Go to Mentimeter. Thank you so much. And please support the initiatives around UBIG. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.